Detective Sarah Martinez had been on the police force for 12 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Her hands trembled as she gripped her service weapon, pointing it directly at the man who had destroyed her life 3 months ago. The warehouse was dark and cold, filled with the smell of rust and abandonment. Dust particles danced in the few rays of sunlight that managed to penetrate through the broken windows high above. The man standing before her was Marcus Chen, a wealthy businessman who had seemed so charming and trustworthy when she first met him. He had approached her at a coffee shop near the police station, striking up conversations about the neighborhood and eventually asking her out. Sarah had been hesitant at first, knowing that dating civilians could complicate her work. But Marcus had been persistent and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know her. Their relationship had blossomed quickly. Marcus would bring her flowers, take her to expensive restaurants, and listen patiently when she talked about the stress of her job. He seemed to understand the weight she carried as one of the few female detectives in her precinct. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she could let her guard down with someone. But everything changed 3 months ago when she discovered the truth. Marcus wasn't just a businessman. He was the head of a major drug distribution network that had been plaguing the city for years. The same network that Sarah's department had been desperately trying to shut down. The same network responsible for flooding the streets with a deadly new synthetic drug that had already claimed dozens of lives. The revelation came during a routine investigation. Sarah had been following a lead on a drug bust when she stumbled upon financial records that tied several shell companies back to Marcus. At first, she couldn't believe it. The man who had held her when she cried after losing a case, who had celebrated her successes and encouraged her dreams, was the very criminal she had been hunting. When she confronted him, Marcus didn't deny it. Instead, he laughed and told her how useful she had been without even knowing it. Every case detail she had shared over dinner, every frustration she had expressed about departmental procedures, every piece of information about ongoing investigations. He had used it all to stay one step ahead of the law. But the worst part wasn't just the betrayal of trust. Marcus had been using their relationship to gather intelligence, and because of the information he had obtained through her, 3 undercover officers had been discovered and killed. Good people with families, with dreams, with futures that were cut short because Sarah had fallen for a lie. The guilt had been eating her alive for months. She had requested time off, unable to focus on her work, knowing that her carelessness had cost lives. Her captain had been understanding, but Sarah knew that whispers followed her through the halls of the precinct. Some colleagues blamed her, others pitied her, but none of that mattered as much as the blame she placed on herself. Sleep had become impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the 3 officers who had died. She saw their families at the funerals, their children asking why daddy or mommy wasn't coming home. She heard their voices in her dreams, asking her why she had trusted a stranger with information that should have stayed classified. Today, Sarah had finally received the tip she had been waiting for. An informant had contacted her directly, telling her that Marcus would be at this abandoned warehouse to oversee a major drug shipment. This was her chance to make things right, to capture the man who had used her and caused so much death and destruction. She had considered calling for backup, following proper protocol, but something inside her wanted to face Marcus alone. She needed to look him in the eyes when she arrested him, needed him to know that she wouldn't be fooled again. More than that, she needed to prove to herself that she could be the detective she used to be before he had shattered her confidence. The warehouse had been quiet when she arrived, but Sarah's training had served her well. She had moved carefully through the shadows, her weapon drawn and ready. She could hear voices coming from the main floor, and as she got closer, she recognized Marcus's voice giving orders to several other men. For a moment, she had hesitated. The smart thing would be to call for backup and wait. But the faces of the 3 dead officers flashed in her mind again, and she knew she couldn't wait. This might be her only chance to get justice for them and redemption for herself. Now here she stood, her gun trained on Marcus while his associates scattered like rats when they saw her badge. He looked different than she remembered. Harder, colder, without the fake warmth he had shown her during their relationship. This was the real Marcus, the man behind the mask he had worn for her benefit. "Hello, Sarah," he said calmly, as if they were meeting for coffee instead of in an abandoned warehouse surrounded by evidence of his crimes. "I wondered when you might show up. "You're under arrest," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Turn around and put your hands behind your head." Marcus smiled, the same charming smile that had once made her heart race. Now it just made her stomach turn. "You know, you were always so predictable, so eager to do the right thing, to follow the rules. That's what made you so easy to manipulate." The words hit her like a physical blow, but Sarah kept her weapon steady. "I said turn around. Don't make this harder than it has to be." "Or what?" Marcus asked, taking a step closer. "You'll shoot me? We both know you don't have it in you, Sarah. You're too good, too moral. That's your weakness." Sarah felt her finger tighten on the trigger. For just a moment, she imagined what it would feel like to pull it, to end this nightmare once and for all. But she was a police officer, sworn to uphold the law, not to be judge and jury. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly, "but I'm still taking you in." The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed behind her in the empty warehouse. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized she wasn't alone with Marcus after all. The voice that came from behind Sarah was low, steady, and completely unfamiliar. It carried the kind of authority that made even seasoned criminals pause. And Sarah felt every muscle in her body tense as the words echoed through the warehouse. "Drop the gun." Sarah's training screamed at her to turn around, to assess the new threat, but doing so would mean taking her weapon off Marcus. She could see the satisfaction in his eyes, the way his smile widened as he realized the tables had turned in his favor. Whatever advantage she had gained by surprising him was now gone. "I don't think you heard me clearly," the voice continued, closer now. "Drop your weapon and step away from Mr. Chen." "I'm a police officer," Sarah called out, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Identify yourself." A cold laugh came from behind her. "I know exactly who you are, Detective Martinez. And right now, that badge of yours doesn't mean much." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. This could be another one of Marcus's associates, someone who had been waiting in the shadows. But something about the voice didn't fit. It was too controlled, too professional. This wasn't some street thug or hired muscle. This person spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. "You have 3 seconds to comply," the voice said. "After that, I'll make the decision for you." Marcus was watching the exchange with obvious amusement. "You should listen to him, Sarah. He's not known for his patience. Who is he?" Sarah demanded, still keeping her gun trained on Marcus while trying to listen for any movement behind her. "Let's just say he's someone who helps me with complicated situations," Marcus replied. "And you've certainly created a very complicated situation by coming here alone." The stranger behind her spoke again. 2 seconds. Sarah's options were running out fast. She could try to dive for cover, but the warehouse offered little protection and she would be exposed while moving. She could try to spin around and engage the new threat, but that would give Marcus the opportunity to either escape or attack her, or she could comply and hope that dropping her weapon wouldn't immediately result in her death. "Time's up." Before Sarah could react, she felt something hard press against the back of her neck. The barrel of a gun, held by someone who had moved with complete silence across the warehouse floor. Her tactical training identified it as likely a pistol, probably equipped with a suppressor based on how confidently the stranger was operating. Very slowly, "Place your weapon on the ground and step away from it," the voice instructed. Sarah hesitated for another moment, but the pressure against her neck increased slightly. She had no choice. Slowly, she bent down and placed her service weapon on the dusty concrete floor, then took 2 steps forward as directed. "Kick it toward me," she complied, watching as her gun slid across the floor and disappeared into the shadows behind her. Without her weapon, Sarah felt completely exposed and vulnerable. Her hand instinctively moved toward her radio, but Marcus shook his head. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said. "My friend behind you doesn't like sudden movements." Now that the immediate threat was neutralized, Sarah finally got a look at the person who had been giving the orders. As she was instructed to turn around, she found herself facing a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the warehouse simultaneously. She was dressed in dark clothing that looked expensive but practical, and she held a professional-grade pistol with the kind of steady grip that came from years of training. "Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI," the woman said, producing a badge from her jacket pocket. "You've just interfered with a federal investigation, Detective Martinez." Sarah stared at the badge, her mind struggling to process this new information. "FBI, what investigation? This man is a drug dealer responsible for multiple homicides. We know exactly who Marcus Chen is and what he's done. Agent Torres replied. "We've been building a case against his entire organization for the past 18 months. Your little vigilante mission just potentially destroyed months of careful work." "Vigilante mission?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. "I'm a police officer conducting an arrest based on credible intelligence. Intelligence you obtained through unauthorized channels while on administrative leave," Torres pointed out. "Intelligence you acted on without consulting your department or checking for ongoing federal operations." Marcus had been listening to this exchange with growing confidence. "So what happens now? Do I just walk away while you two sort out your jurisdictional issues?" "You stay exactly where you are," Torres snapped, her gun never wavering. "Both of you." This situation just became significantly more complicated than it needed to be. Sarah felt a mixture of anger and confusion building inside her. If you've been investigating him for 18 months, why hasn't he been arrested? How many more people have to die while you build your perfect case? You think this is about building a perfect case? Torres's voice carried a sharp edge. Chen's operation extends far beyond drug distribution. He's connected to human trafficking, money laundering, and arms dealing across 3 states. If we move too soon, we lose the bigger fish. The bigger fish, Sarah repeated bitterly. While children overdose on his synthetic drugs and police officers die because of information he obtained through me. For the first time, Torres's expression softened slightly. "I know about the undercover officers. I know this is personal for you. But your desire for revenge doesn't justify compromising a major federal investigation." Marcus laughed. "Revenge? Is that what this is about, Sarah? You're still upset about our little relationship?" Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "Those officers had families. They had lives. And they're dead because I trusted you. They're dead because they were doing their jobs in a dangerous line of work." Marcus replied coldly. "Don't flatter yourself by thinking you're that important to my operations." The casual dismissal of the officers' deaths and his relationship with Sarah hit her like a physical blow. She started to move toward him, but Torres stepped between them. "That's enough," the FBI agent said firmly. "Chen, you're going to sit down over there and keep your mouth shut. Martinez, you're going to explain to me exactly how you found out about this meeting and who else knows you're here." "I work alone on this," Sarah said. "No one else knows." "That's the first smart thing you've done today," Torres replied. "But it also means no one knows where you are if something goes wrong." The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that despite Torres's FBI credentials, she was still essentially at the mercy of 2 people who had good reason to want her silenced. The federal agent needed to protect her investigation, and Marcus certainly had no love for the woman who could identify him and testify about his crimes. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Sarah asked carefully. Torres holstered her weapon and pulled out a phone. "I'm suggesting that we need to have a very serious conversation about how to handle this situation without destroying the work my team has been doing or ending your career in law enforcement." As Torres began dialing a number, Sarah noticed Marcus watching the interaction with intense interest. He was calculating something, looking for an advantage in the shifting dynamics between the detective and the federal agent. Sarah realized that whatever happened next, none of them were walking away from this warehouse the same way they had entered it. Agent Torres spoke quietly into her phone, using codes and terminology that Sarah couldn't fully understand. While the FBI agent was distracted, Sarah kept a careful eye on Marcus, who had moved to lean against a stack of wooden crates but showed no signs of trying to escape. His calm demeanor was unsettling. Most criminals would be looking for an exit strategy by now, but Marcus seemed almost relaxed. "Copy that," Torres said into the phone before ending the call. She turned back to Sarah and Marcus, her expression serious. "My supervisor is sending a team to secure this location and debrief both of you. Detective Martinez, you're going to need to come with us for questioning." "Questioning about what?" Sarah demanded. "I haven't broken any laws." "You've potentially compromised a federal investigation," Torres replied. "At minimum, that's going to require extensive debriefing to determine what damage has been done and how to proceed." Marcus spoke up from his position against the crates. "You know, this is all very interesting, but I think there's something both of you should know." Both women turned to look at him, and Sarah noticed that his entire demeanor had changed. The casual smugness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like concern. "This warehouse isn't as abandoned as it appears," Marcus continued. In fact, it's been under surveillance by some very dangerous people who don't work for either of your organizations. What are you talking about? Torres demanded. I didn't come here for a drug shipment, Marcus said. I came here because I was told someone wanted to meet with me. Someone who claimed to have information about federal investigations into my operations. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You're saying this was a setup? I'm saying that neither of us were as clever as we thought we were, Marcus replied. Someone wanted us both here, and they wanted us here at the same time. Torres had drawn her weapon again, scanning the shadows of the warehouse with new urgency. Who contacted you about this meeting? A woman who claimed to work for a rival organization, Marcus said. She knew details about my business that only someone with inside information could know. She offered to trade intelligence about federal investigations in exchange for territory agreements. And you believed her? Sarah asked. I believed the information she provided to prove her credibility, Marcus answered. She knew about Agent Torres's investigation, including details that haven't been shared outside federal law enforcement. Torres lowered her weapon slightly, her face pale. That's impossible. Our investigation is compartmentalized. Only 5 agents have access to the complete file. 6 agents, Marcus corrected, or at least that's what she told me. The implication was clear, and Sarah could see Torres processing the possibility that someone in her own organization might be compromised. The FBI agent pulled out her phone again, but before she could dial, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching echoed through the warehouse. That's not my team, Torres said grimly. They weren't due to arrive for another 20 minutes. Sarah looked around the warehouse desperately, finally understanding why Marcus had seemed so calm. He had known this was a trap from the beginning, but he had walked into it anyway. The question was whether he was working with whoever had set it up, or if he was as much a victim as she and Torres were. There's a back exit through the loading dock, Marcus said, pointing toward the rear of the building, but it's probably being watched by now. How do you know about the back exit if you've never been here before? Torres demanded. Because I scouted this location before coming here, just like any smart criminal would do, Marcus replied, the same way any smart federal agent would do before walking into what might be a trap. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside, followed by the low murmur of multiple voices. Sarah counted at least 4 distinct voices, possibly more. Whoever was out there, they had come prepared for exactly this situation. We need to get out of here now, Torres said, holstering her weapon and moving toward the rear of the warehouse. Both of you move. As they made their way through the maze of abandoned equipment and storage containers, Sarah's mind was racing. Nothing about this situation made sense. If Torres was really FBI and had been investigating Marcus for 18 months, why hadn't he been arrested already? If Marcus was really the head of a major criminal organization, why would he risk coming to a meeting that could be a trap? And most importantly, who had enough information about both the federal investigation and Marcus's operations to orchestrate this elaborate setup? They reached the loading dock area, where large metal doors provided access for trucks to load and unload cargo. Torres peered through a small window, then quickly ducked back down. 3 vehicles, at least 6 people that I can see, she whispered. They're positioned to cover all the exits. Who are they? Sarah asked. I don't know, Torres admitted. But they're armed and they're moving with military precision. Marcus had been quiet during their retreat, but now he spoke up. There's something else you both need to know. The woman who contacted me didn't just know about the federal investigation. She also knew about Detective Martinez's involvement with me. Sarah's blood ran cold. What do you mean? She knew about our relationship, about how you discovered my identity, about the 3 officers who died, Marcus said. She knew details that I never told anyone, details that weren't in any official reports. That's impossible, Sarah protested. I never filed a complete report about our relationship. I was too ashamed. But someone knows, Marcus insisted. Someone who has access to information from both the police department and the FBI. Torres was studying both of them with new suspicion. Or someone who was told by one of you. I didn't tell anyone, Sarah said firmly. I've barely spoken to anyone about this situation except my captain, and even then I didn't give him all the details. And I certainly didn't advertise the fact that I had compromised a police detective. Marcus added, that kind of information is too valuable to share carelessly. The sound of footsteps on gravel outside was getting closer. Torres checked her weapon and looked around the loading dock area for anything they could use for cover or as an alternate escape. Route, there's a drainage tunnel that runs under this part of the city, Marcus said quietly. Access point is in the basement. It's not pleasant, but it connects to the storm drain system. How do you know about drainage tunnels? Torres asked suspiciously. Because I've made it my business to know about alternative routes in and out of every location I use, Marcus replied. It's called survival. A loud bang echoed through the warehouse as someone forced open the main entrance. Voices began calling out, coordinating a systematic search of the building. Basement, Torres decided. Now. As they made their way down a set of rusty metal stairs, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking deeper into a trap rather than escaping from one. Someone had orchestrated this entire situation, bringing together a compromised detective, a federal agent, and the criminal they were both pursuing. The question was whether that someone wanted them dead, or wanted them alive for something far worse. The basement of the warehouse was a maze of old pipes, electrical conduits, and storage areas that had been abandoned for decades. The air was thick with dust and the smell of rust and decay. Torres used a small flashlight to illuminate their path, while Sarah stayed close behind and Marcus brought up the rear. There, Marcus whispered, pointing to a section of the floor where several concrete blocks had been moved aside to reveal a dark opening. The drainage access. Torres examined the opening with her flashlight. It was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, and the smell coming from it suggested it hadn't been cleaned in years. You first, she told Marcus. Then Detective Martinez, then me. Why me first? Marcus asked. Because if this is another trap, I want you where I can see you, Torres replied. Marcus shrugged and lowered himself into the tunnel. Sarah could hear him moving through the water and debris below. After a few moments, his voice echoed back up to them. It's clear down here. About 4 feet of headroom once you're in, and maybe 6 inches of water. Smells like a sewer, but it's passable. Sarah went next, dropping down into the tunnel and immediately regretting it. The water was cold and filled with things she didn't want to think about. The walls were covered with years of grime and moss, and she could hear the scurrying of small animals in the darkness ahead. Torres dropped down behind her, and they began making their way through the tunnel system. The flashlight beam danced ahead of them, revealing a straight passage that seemed to stretch on forever. Where does this lead? Sarah asked, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. If I'm right, it should connect to the main storm drain system about half a mile from here, Marcus replied. From there, we can access several different exit points throughout the city. They moved in silence for several minutes, the only sounds being their footsteps in the water and the distant dripping of moisture from the tunnel ceiling. Sarah's mind was still trying to process everything that had happened in the warehouse. The more she thought about it, the more questions arose. Agent Torres, she said quietly, how long have you really been investigating Marcus? 18 months, like I told you, Torres replied. But if you've been watching him that closely, you would have known about our relationship, Sarah pointed out. You would have known that he was using me to gather intelligence about police operations. Torres was quiet for a moment. We knew he had a source in local law enforcement. We didn't know it was you specifically until recently. How recently? Sarah pressed. About 3 months ago, Torres admitted. Sarah stopped walking, causing Torres to bump into her in the narrow tunnel. 3 months ago, right around the time I discovered who Marcus really was. That's not a coincidence, Marcus said from ahead of them. Someone wanted Agent Torres to know about you, Sarah. What do you mean? Sarah asked. Think about it, Marcus continued. The FBI discovers I have a police source at the exact same time you discover my identity. That's not investigative work. That's information being provided by someone who wanted both sides to know what the other was doing. Torres's voice was tense. You're suggesting someone deliberately exposed Detective Martinez to protect you. I'm suggesting someone has been manipulating all of us from the beginning, Marcus replied. The question is who and why. They reached a junction where their tunnel connected with a larger drainage pipe. Torres consulted a small GPS device and pointed to the left. That way should take us toward downtown. As they continued through the larger tunnel, Sarah found herself thinking about the timeline of events. 3 months ago, she had been at the height of her relationship with Marcus. She had been sharing information without realizing it, and Marcus had been using that information to stay ahead of law enforcement investigations. But if Torres was right, The FBI had identified her as Marcus's source at exactly the same time she discovered his identity. That meant someone had wanted her to find out the truth about Marcus, and had wanted the FBI to know about her involvement. "Marcus," she said, "when you realized I had discovered who you were, what did you do?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, did you tell anyone about it? Did you report to someone that your police source had been compromised?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I reported it to my handler, yes." "Your handler?" Torres stopped walking. "You're working for someone else?" "I'm not the head of the organization," Marcus said. "I'm middle management. I run operations in this city, but I report to someone higher up the chain." "Who?" Torres demanded. "I don't know their real name," Marcus admitted. "All my contact is through encrypted communications and dead drops. But about a week after Sarah confronted me, I received new instructions." "What kind of instructions?" Sarah asked. "I was told to maintain my cover and continue operating as if nothing had changed. I was told that the situation with Detective Martinez was being handled at a higher level." Torres grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and spun him around to face her in the narrow tunnel. "Handled how?" "I assumed they meant they were going to eliminate her," Marcus said quietly. "But then nothing happened. Sarah wasn't arrested, wasn't transferred, wasn't harmed. She was just put on administrative leave, which actually made it easier for me to operate without her inadvertently providing intelligence." Sarah felt sick. "So you knew someone was planning to kill me and you didn't warn me?" "I thought they had decided it wasn't necessary," Marcus protested. "If they had wanted you dead, you would have been dead months ago." "Unless they wanted me alive for something else," Sarah realized. "Unless they needed me for something that required me to stay alive and stay on the police force." Torres resumed walking, but her pace was faster now. "We need to get out of these tunnels and contact my supervisor immediately. If there's a connection between Marcus's organization and someone with access to federal law enforcement information, we have a much bigger problem than drug distribution." "Wait," Sarah said, grabbing Torres's arm. "How do we know we can trust your supervisor?" "What do you mean?" "You said only 6 agents had access to the complete investigation file. If Marcus's contact knew details from that file, then one of those 6 agents is compromised." Torres stared at her for a moment, then looked back at Marcus. "How high up in your organization does this go?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "But whoever my handler is, they have resources that go far beyond street-level drug dealing. They have access to law enforcement intelligence from multiple agencies. They can coordinate complex operations across state lines, and they have enough influence to protect their assets even when they're exposed." A new sound echoed through the tunnel system. The sound of multiple people moving through water, coming from behind them. Their pursuers had found the basement access point and were following them through the drainage system. "Move," Torres ordered. "We need to reach an exit point before they catch up." As they hurried through the tunnel, Sarah realized that they weren't just running from the people who had trapped them in the warehouse. They were running from an organization that had infiltrated both local law enforcement and federal agencies. An organization that had been manipulating all of them for months, if not years. And Sarah was beginning to suspect that their escape through the tunnels was exactly what that organization wanted them to do. The tunnel system seemed to go on forever, a maze of concrete passages that all looked identical in the dim light of Torres's flashlight. The sound of their pursuers had grown closer, and Sarah could now hear distinct voices echoing through the tunnels behind them. Whoever was following them knew the system well enough to track their movement with frightening efficiency. "There's a ladder access about 200 yards ahead," Marcus called back to them. "It should take us up to street level near the financial district." "How do you know this system so well?" Torres demanded, breathing hard from their rapid pace through the waist-deep water. "Because I've used it before," Marcus admitted. "Not for escaping, for transportation. Moving product through the city without being detected by surveillance cameras." Sarah realized that Marcus had just confirmed something she had been suspecting. "The drainage tunnels connect to other locations you use. This isn't random, you're leading us somewhere specific." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face them. In the flashlight beam, his expression was grim. "You're right, but not for the reason you think." "Then explain it," Torres said, raising her weapon. "The ladder we're heading for doesn't just provide access to the street," Marcus said. "It also connects to a sub-basement level of a building that's been used as a safe house by my organization. If we go up there, we'll be walking directly into another trap. Then why are we going that way?" Sarah asked. Because the people following us aren't trying to catch us, Marcus replied. They're hurting us. Every junction we've passed, every choice of direction we've made, we've been guided toward this specific location. Torres lowered her weapon slightly. You're saying they want us to go to the safe house? I'm saying they planned this entire scenario from the beginning, Marcus said. The meeting at the warehouse, Sarah showing up at the same time, you being there to intercept both of us. All of it was orchestrated to bring us to this point. The sound of splashing water was getting closer behind them. Sarah estimated they had maybe 5 minutes before their pursuers caught up. If you're right, then what's at the safe house? She asked answers, Marcus said simply. Someone who wants to talk to all three of us together. Or someone who wants to kill all three of us together, Torres pointed out. If they wanted us dead, they would have done it at the warehouse, Marcus argued. They had the advantage, the numbers, and the element of surprise. Instead, they chased us into these tunnels knowing exactly where we would go. Sarah looked between Marcus and Torres, trying to decide who to trust. 3 months ago, she would have trusted Marcus with her life. Now she knew that trust had been misplaced. But Torres, despite her FBI credentials, had also been keeping secrets about the investigation and Sarah's role in it. What if we don't go to the latter? Sarah asked. What if we take a different route? There are only 2 other options from here, Marcus said. We can go back the way we came, directly into the people following us. Or we can take the eastern branch, which dead ends at a pumping station that's been sealed for years. So our only real choice is the latter, Torres concluded. Unless we want to make a stand here in the tunnels, Marcus said. But fighting in confined spaces with limited visibility isn't exactly ideal. The voices behind them were now close enough that Sarah could make out individual words. Their pursuers were moving methodically, checking every side passage and junction to ensure they didn't miss their targets. We go up, Sarah decided. But we go up ready for whatever we find. Torres nodded grimly and checked her weapon. Sarah realized she was completely unarmed, having left her service pistol in the warehouse when Torres had disarmed her. I don't suppose either of you has a backup weapon, she asked. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small pistol. I never go anywhere unarmed. You're giving her a gun? Torres asked incredulously. She's a trained police officer who's proven she can be trusted to do the right thing, Marcus replied, handing the weapon to Sarah. Besides, if this really is a trap, we're going to need all the firepower we can get. Sarah checked the pistol quickly. It was loaded and ready to fire. Having a weapon in her hands again made her feel more like herself, more like the detective she had been before this nightmare began. They reached the ladder access point, a vertical shaft that disappeared into darkness above them. Marcus went first, climbing carefully up the rusted metal rungs. Torres followed, and Sarah brought up the rear, pausing to listen for their pursuers before beginning her climb. The ladder was longer than she had expected, rising at least 30 feet before reaching what appeared to be a heavy metal grate. She could hear Marcus working to open it, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoing down the shaft. It's not locked, Marcus called down quietly, but it's heavy. Give me a minute. After some effort, light began to filter down the shaft as Marcus pushed the grate aside. He climbed out, followed by Torres, and then Sarah emerged into what appeared to be a basement storage room filled with old furniture and boxes. The room was dimly lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. There were no windows, but Sarah could hear the distant sounds of traffic above them, confirming they were back at street level beneath a building in the financial district. Welcome back, Marcus. The voice came from the shadows near the far end of the room. Sarah spun toward the sound, raising her weapon while Torres did the same. Marcus, however, didn't seem surprised. A woman stepped into the light and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. She recognized the face immediately, Captain Linda Hayes from her own police department. The woman who had been understanding about Sarah's request for administrative leave, who had supported her through the difficult months following her discovery of Marcus's identity. Captain Hayes? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. What are you doing here? Hello, Sarah, Captain Hayes said calmly. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but circumstances have forced our hand. Torres kept her weapon trained on Hayes. You're the leak in the police department. You've been feeding information to Marcus's organization. I've been protecting valuable assets and managing complex operations that require coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies, Hayes corrected. What you call corruption, I call pragmatic resource management. You had 3 undercover officers killed, Sarah said, her voice rising with anger. Good people with families. I had 3 officers who were getting too close to operations that needed to remain hidden, Hayes replied without emotion. Their deaths were unfortunate but necessary to protect the larger mission. Marcus spoke up from behind Sarah. What larger mission? You told me I was working for a drug distribution network. Hayes smiled. Marcus, you've always been a bit naive for someone in your position. The drug operation is just one small part of what we do. We provide services to people who need things done quietly and efficiently. Politicians, corporate executives, foreign governments. The drug money helps fund our operations, but it's not our primary business. What is your primary business? Torres demanded. Information control, Hayes said simply. We identify problems before they become public scandals. We manage investigations to ensure they reach the conclusions that serve the greater good. We eliminate threats to national security and economic stability. Sarah felt sick as the implications of what Hayes was saying began to sink in. You're talking about assassination and cover-ups. I'm talking about maintaining order in a complex world, Hayes corrected. Do you think the average citizen could handle knowing about every terrorist plot, every corporate conspiracy, every government operation that keeps them safe? We do the dirty work so others can sleep peacefully. And who decides what the greater good is? Torres asked. People much smarter and better informed than any of us, Hayes replied. People who see the bigger picture and understand the long-term consequences of every decision. Sarah's mind was racing, trying to understand how deep this conspiracy went. How long have you been working for them? 15 years, Hayes said. I started as a patrol officer who occasionally looked the other way when certain individuals needed to avoid scrutiny. Over time, I proved my value and was promoted both within the police department and within the organization. The organization has a name? Marcus asked. Names are limiting, Hayes said. We prefer to think of ourselves as a resource that can be applied to various problems as needed. Torres had been listening to this exchange while keeping her weapon ready, but now she spoke up. This is all very interesting, but I'm still FBI, and you're all under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and federal crimes too numerous to count. Hayes laughed. Agent Torres, do you really think the FBI isn't aware of our operations? Do you think your investigation of Marcus was independent?
What do you mean?
Your investigation was authorized and funded specifically to give Marcus's operation legitimacy, Hayes explained. Having an active federal investigation actually helps us by explaining why local law enforcement hasn't been able to shut down the drug business. It provides cover for our real operations. That's impossible, Torres protested. My supervisor would never authorize a fake investigation. Your supervisor takes his orders from people who take their orders from the same people I work for, Hayes said. Agent Torres, you've been investigating a carefully constructed facade while the real organization operated completely outside your awareness. Sarah realized they were in more danger than she had initially thought. If Hayes was telling the truth, then they weren't just dealing with a criminal organization. They were dealing with a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement and government. So what happens now? Sarah asked. Are you going to kill us to protect your secrets? That depends entirely on your willingness to become part of the solution rather than part of the problem, Hayes replied. All 3 of you have skills and resources that could be valuable to our operations. Marcus has already proven his worth. Agent Torres has access to federal resources. And you, Sarah, have shown remarkable dedication and moral flexibility when properly motivated. Moral flexibility? Sarah's voice was cold. You came here tonight planning to kill Marcus, Hayes pointed out. You were willing to abandon proper procedure and risk your career for what you believed was justice. That kind of commitment, properly directed, could serve much larger purposes. Sarah looked at Marcus and Torres, trying to gauge their reactions to Hayes's offer. Marcus seemed to be considering it seriously, while Torres looked like she was calculating the odds of fighting their way out. But before any of them could respond, the sound of multiple footsteps came from the stairway leading up from the basement. Their pursuers from the tunnels had found another way into the building. Time's up, Hayes said, pulling out a weapon of her own. Choose sides now, or have the choice made for you. The basement filled with the sound of footsteps as at least 6 people descended the stairs, their weapons drawn and ready. Sarah recognized some of them as officers from her own precinct, People she had worked with for years. People she had trusted with her life. Now they were pointing guns at her under orders from a captain who had betrayed everything they had sworn to protect. "Detective Martinez, Agent Torres," one of the officers called out. "Put down your weapons and step away from the suspect." Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of it. After everything she had learned in the past few hours, they were still trying to maintain the pretense that this was a legitimate law enforcement operation. "Which one of us is the suspect?" She called back. "The federal agent, the police detective, or the drug dealer who's been working for our captain all along?" Captain Hayes gestured for silence. "Sarah, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Put down your weapon and let's discuss this rationally." "Rationally?" Sarah's voice rose. "You had 3 police officers murdered to protect a criminal conspiracy, and you want to discuss it rationally. I made difficult decisions to protect operations that serve the greater good," Hayes replied calmly. "Those officers were good people, but they were about to expose activities that would have compromised national security operations." Torres stepped forward, her weapon still trained on Hayes. "I'm calling this into federal authorities. Agent Torres, the federal authorities already know about this operation," Hayes said. "Who do you think authorized your investigation in the first place?" "You're lying." "Am I? Then use your radio. Call your supervisor. Ask him to explain why your investigation has been allowed to continue for 18 months without making any significant arrests." Torres hesitated, and Sarah could see the doubt creeping into her expression. If Hayes was telling the truth, then the FBI investigation had been compromised from the beginning, and Torres had been used just as much as Sarah had been. Marcus had been quiet during this exchange, but now he stepped forward. "Captain Hayes, I need to know something. The 3 officers who died, was that really necessary? They were about to identify you through financial records that would have led them to our larger operations," Hayes explained. "If they had succeeded, we would have lost years of work and millions of dollars in operational funding. But they were cops," Marcus said quietly. "They were good people doing their jobs, and their jobs put them in conflict with our mission," Hayes replied. "I didn't enjoy making that decision, Marcus, but it was the only option that protected the greater good." Sarah watched this exchange with growing understanding. Marcus wasn't as cold-blooded as she had thought. He had been manipulated just as much as she had, led to believe he was part of a criminal organization when he was actually part of something much larger and more dangerous. "The greater good," Sarah repeated. "Who defines that? Who decides which lives matter and which ones don't?" "People who have access to information that you can't imagine," Hayes said. "People who understand the global implications of every decision, every investigation, every arrest. People who hide in the shadows and manipulate others to do their dirty work," Torres added. Hayes shrugged. "People who get results while maintaining plausible deniability for elected officials and appointed administrators." The officers on the stairs were getting restless, and Sarah could see them shifting position to get better angles of fire. Whatever decision was going to be made, it needed to happen soon. "Here's what's going to happen," Hayes announced. "Agent Torres, you're going to call your supervisor and inform him that your investigation has reached a natural conclusion. The drug operation has been shut down. Marcus Chen has been eliminated while resisting arrest, and Detective Martinez died heroically in the line of duty." "And what actually happens to us?" Sarah asked. "That depends on your willingness to cooperate," Hayes said. "Marcus will be relocated and given a new identity and a new assignment in another city. Agent Torres will be transferred to a different case and will never speak about this investigation again. And you, Sarah, will have a choice." "What choice?" "You can die here tonight as a hero who gave her life to stop a dangerous criminal," Hayes said. "Or you can disappear and be reborn as someone who works for us. Someone who uses her skills and experience to serve the greater good." Sarah looked around the basement, taking in the faces of people she had once trusted, people who were now part of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. She thought about the 3 officers who had died because they had gotten too close to the truth, about the families who would never see their loved ones again. "There's a third option," Sarah said quietly. "Which is, we fight back." Sarah raised her weapon and fired, not at Hayes, but at the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The basement plunged into darkness as the bulb shattered, and chaos erupted as everyone tried to find cover. In the confusion, Sarah heard Torres shouting into her radio, calling for federal backup and identifying Hayes as a rogue officer. She heard Marcus moving through the darkness, apparently heading for the tunnel access they had used to enter the basement. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the officers on the stairs tried to maintain control of the situation. Sarah rolled behind a stack of boxes, using the muzzle flashes to track the positions of the shooters. "Sarah!" Torres's voice came from somewhere across the room.
"The tunnel?"
Sarah began moving toward the sound of Torres's voice, staying low and using the stored furniture for cover. She could hear Hayes shouting orders, trying to coordinate the other officers in the darkness. A hand grabbed her arm, and Sarah almost fired before recognizing Marcus's voice. "This way," he whispered urgently. Together, they made their way back to the tunnel access, where Torres was already waiting with her flashlight ready. The sounds of gunfire continued above them as they descended into the drainage system once again. "Where do we go now?" Torres asked as they began moving through the tunnels. "Somewhere we can contact people who aren't part of this conspiracy," Sarah replied. "Somewhere we can tell the truth about what's happening." "And if there isn't anywhere like that?" Marcus asked. Sarah thought about the 3 officers who had died, about Captain Hayes's casual dismissal of their lives, about the conspiracy that had manipulated all of them for months or years. "Then we make our own somewhere," she said, "and we make sure everyone knows the truth, no matter what it costs us." As they moved through the dark tunnels beneath the city, Sarah realized that her life as Detective Sarah Martinez was over. But maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to honor the memory of the officers who had died by exposing the people responsible for their deaths. The tunnel stretched ahead of them into uncertainty, but for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she was moving in the right direction.